More than 80% of silent films and a high percentage of old sound films have been lost or are now unaccounted for, according to the Lost Films Archive. This presentation will introduce a handful of the more famous pictures that failed in production, were created and shelved, or were lost in some way. There are many more examples beyond the few described here. These films are great opportunities to wonder, what if? Released in 1914, The Life of General Villa was a biographical action drama set during the Mexican Revolution. The film includes both actual footage and stage scenes of the conflict. Most notably, Pancho Villa plays himself throughout the picture, except in sequences when he is a young man, where director Raoul Walsh plays him. It is reported that the reason for Villa's decision to appear in the film were financial. He needed funds for the revolution. This picture was also produced by D.W. Griffith, who'd reached widespread acclaim and ultimately infamy for his next picture, The Birth of a Nation. The Life of General Villa is presumably lost, with only brief segments and production stills in existence today. This film would be an interesting historical document had it survived. Frank Norris's classic novel McTeague was adapted into the 1924 psychological dramatic epic Greed. Directed by Erich von Stroheim, who is probably best known today for his role as Max the Butler in Sunset Boulevard, Greed's story is one of the greatest tragedies of the silent era. Originally around 8 hours in length and 42 reels worth of film, Greed was cut by the studio to around 2.5 hours. Today, only stills exist from these missing sequences. A restored version shows title screens describing what occurs during the lost segments. Thankfully, much of the film's finale exists, which features gold-tinted frames and is shot on location in Death Valley. Considered a financial failure and maligned during its time, Greed has since come to be regarded as one of the greatest pictures ever made, complete or not. Household name Alfred Hitchcock's second directorial effort was 1926's silent drama The Mountain Eagle. Set in rural Kentucky, this picture follows a widower and his disabled son who compete with each other over the romantic attention of a local schoolteacher. In the following years, Hitchcock would find critical acclaim with his Jack the Ripper-inspired thriller, The Lodger, a story of the London fog. The Mountain Eagle is shrouded in mystery and controversy. It currently resides at the top of the BFI's list of most wanted films. Some claim Hitchcock confided in fellow director Francois Truffaut that he was glad it was lost. Currently, only 6 reproduction stills exist. Another lost silent film, London After Midnight, also marketed as The Hypnotist, was a 1927 mystery starring Lon Chaney. Known then as today as the Man of a Thousand Faces, Chaney had worked before with director Todd Browning, most famous for Dracula, Freaks, and The Unknown. In this Browning effort, Chaney plays a vampiric hypnotist and murderer whose identity is shrouded in mystery. Like many of Chaney's classic roles, this picture utilizes makeup to transform the actor into something monstrous. Sadly, London After Midnight was lost in a 1965 MGM vault fire. Attempts have been made to reconstruct the picture using scripts and stills. This reconstructed version has been released, but the original work remains one of the most sought-after lost pictures in cinema history. In 1939, Orson Welles wrote a 174-page adaptation of Joseph Conrad's classic novella Heart of Darkness. He presented his completed screenplay to the executives at RKO Pictures. The picture was deemed to be too risky, and ultimately the project was abandoned. Heart of Darkness was later adapted into the Vietnam War era for Apocalypse Now, in addition to a pan-90s adaptation. Instead, Welles delivered Heart of Darkness as a radio drama, complementing his productions of Julius Caesar and The War of the Worlds, which is best known today for inciting a panic in certain parts of the country. Welles as a director is known for his technical innovations in pictures like Citizen Kane, The Magnificent Ambersons, and Touch of Evil. What he would have brought to Conrad's classic novel can only be imagined. Whether you know him from his early roles alongside Dean Martin, his actor, writer, director efforts that boast a slapstick style of comedy uniquely his own, or for hosting the telethons later in his life, there can be no dispute that Jerry Lewis was a visionary and legend in his field. One of the more curious pictures Lewis made is called The Day the Clown Cried. Made in 1972, this picture stars Lewis as a down-on-his-luck clown imprisoned in a concentration camp. He is blackmailed to have his case reviewed if he agrees to use his circus talents to lure children to various parts of the camp. This picture, after completion, was shelved by Lewis for reasons that aren't difficult to fathom. However, Lewis later donated a copy to the Library of Congress. Currently, The Day the Clown Cried is slated to be available to the public no sooner than June 2024. Next is Alejandro Jodorowsky's adaptation of Frank Herbert's classic novel Dune. Everything about this film sounds intriguing. Given Jodorowsky's earlier pictures, The Holy Mountain and El Topo, which are surreal blendings of Western, horror, art house, and psychedelia, one can only imagine the spectacle that Dune would have been in his creative hands. With an original Pink Floyd soundtrack and artwork from Moebius and H.R. Geiger, with roles by Orson Welles, David Carradine, Mick Jagger, Gloria Swanson, and Salvador Dali, the picture holds many of the hallmarks of what would have been a legend. So much interest still exists in this project, which failed for financial reasons, that a documentary about it was released in 2013. In the mid-1990s, Arnold Schwarzenegger and director Paul Verhoeven were moving to create a violent Middle Ages epic about the Crusades. With plans for Jennifer Connelly, Gary Sinise, and Charlton Heston to co-star in the work, the idea was pitched to network executives. As is the case, squabbling over funding ensued, and ultimately the picture was abandoned. One can imagine what this work might have been like, considering Verhoeven's other pictures, RoboCop, Flesh and Blood, and his classic collaboration with Arnold, Total Recall. Similarly, looking at the Conan films, one can imagine Crusade might have been a mixture of these two creative personalities' earlier efforts. Often called unfilmable, Cormac McCarthy's 1985 Western Blood Meridian is an ultra-violent, nightmarish masterpiece founded on the factual exploits of the Glanton Gang, who terrorized the borders between Mexico and the U.S. in the 1840s. Attempts have been made since the 1990s to adapt this novel into a film, beginning with famous director Ridley Scott to actor-director Tommy Lee Jones, who starred in McCarthy adaptation No Country for Old Men, and James Franco, whose love for McCarthy is apparent from his film Child of God. Adapting the non-traditional plot structure of the novel, capturing the nihilistic tone, in addition to adequately casting the picture, seem to be the main hurdles for directors to overcome. In particular, the role of Judge Holden, a 7-foot albino sadist who rides with the Glanton Gang, seems a difficult role to cast. There are countless more pictures that have been lost or destroyed or perished in the morass of production. This presentation has only briefly introduced a handful of the more famous examples. There are societies whose sole aim it is to track down forgotten film and view it, in the hopes that someday there might be a discovery, some old canisters collecting dust in a cabinet might contain lost work that could rewrite the history of film's development.